Welcome to Oclast. I am Dr. Eden reff-presco, or simply Dr. Eden Arlene. This podcast is about disrupting narratives and examining art and identity, and telling stories often left out about the artists and artworks we live with in this world. However, this first episode is personal. It's about me. And I can remember all of the influences of visual art at a very young age, which brings me to this moment in my life. Specifically when I was young and having an interest in anatomy. That's where it began for me, whether it was the human body or animals. I was drawn to artists that captured muscular distinction, if that makes sense. My mother had these books in our home about Michelangelo, and then she also had books that were related to horses. She was a science major, and as a single mom, I lived in the biology department at Southern University in New Orleans. And so at home, I would flip through these books, and some of them were more artistic. So for instance, the ones that introduced me to Michelangelo, it was often these images of this repetitive way in which he focused on just certain parts of the body to perfect his ability to draw them. And then those books about horses, there were photographs of horses, and then there were all of these amazing detailed sketches. I would sit for hours going through those books, and then I would attempt to draw what I saw, just sort of replicating, the line and the value. Another thing about my mother, she was a hustler, okay? So she would find furnishings on the side of the road or at garage sales and bring them home. She would brilliantly reupholster chairs and restore antique lamps, some of which she would keep and then others she would sell. So she also had this 1972 Camaro, and trust me, anyone who lived in New Orleans knew this car because she practically restored it, but having the car over several decades, it was always still a work in progress. However, I observed that progress. I observed her process. I observed her patience with developing and putting these things together, whether it's the car, whether it's the chairs, whether it was other items or, around the house. She was patient. She used a lot of trial and error. And she was an independent woman who was thoughtful about her ingenuity. Living with my dad during my formative years, I was surrounded by his instruments and his music, an outstanding collection of albums consisting of blues artists like B.B. King, or either funk music like the Meters or the Neville Brothers. I gained a tremendous knowledge of jazz music, R&B, and blues music at a very young age. I grew up also in a home with my paternal grandmother, who spent time decorating her interior environment, changing it often. And so there was these layers of textures and colors, and there was all of this depth that, consisted of visual aesthetics that were so much, of her personality. It radiated from every wall. Her home was a safe haven. Her gifts, man, this woman was gifted. And the way that she put together the fabrics and the flooring, it was all in a way in which she curated it. Even her garden, was curated this way. And so there was this enthusiasm when we pulled up to her house, whenever we were going there for a visit, there was this excitement because I knew I was going to be in this space that she loved and adored and put so much artistry into it. Okay. Now, on to the visual artists. I want to say, I have to give you a disclaimer because there's so many visual artists that I have made connections with, that have inspired me in so many ways, right? But I'm only going to talk about 3, right? I'm going to talk about specifically those artists that made a unique contribution to my identity as I see myself as a Black woman, and then also how I see myself as an artist. The first artist is Elizabeth Catlett. I met her decades ago after I developed this fondness for her work. I was just learning how to do printmaking, and the woodcut she created entitled Sharecropper resonated with me. It felt kindred and familiar. The imagery reminds me of the New Orleans heat. If you know anything about New Orleans, you know how suffocating that heat can be sometimes. And the woman in this particular composition is wearing this very large brimmed hat that is incised into the woodcut, the image of this woman who has these very broad features. It reminds me of Creole women working in their gardens, contemplating, the heat or something more deeply related to God's vision of life. That's the way I see it. This work teaches us the brilliance and strength of African American women, and that there should be an appreciation for the resilience of Black women who have stories, right? This composition shows a woman who is almost contemplative with her head slightly upward and not at a full profile, more so a quarter profile pose. And I could imagine, and this is where my own imagination comes into play, but I could imagine her thoughts, So it's more that this piece specifically speaks to me as a Black woman and knowing the legacy that Black women have endured and created and lived. So that's pretty much my connection to Elizabeth Catlett, only through this one piece, because there are many others that have resonated with me as well. The next artist that has had an amazing impact on me, and I have to tell you, first, I'll say this. It's amazing to me how visual artists during the Harlem Renaissance or after the Harlem Renaissance, going into the 60s and the 70s, the Black Arts movement, the fact that this began to sort of reestablish what a Black aesthetic was for these artists. Norman Lewis is the one who has had the most impact on me, because I saw his earlier works, which were more figurative, right? So you're looking at, for instance, the painting, The Woman in the Yellow Hat, which is one of the more iconic pieces, but the later works in his career is what I noticed, because a lot of us study visual art at the academia level. We learn about European artists and those the art world calls masters, right? And so it's his lead in breaking away from, the figurative to delve into the world of abstraction. And it's a complicated area to understand, at least for me it was, because simply when I started out as an artist, when I was in my first year of college, I remember that I could not connect with abstract art, and I was like, in my own ignorance, looking at, what I deem to be randomness. And it's much like what I talk to my students about, this idea of looking at work and formulating these opinions about a person's creative process with no context or understanding. And so as I matured in my studies, I began to appreciate works, especially by Norman Lewis. You see, there are a number of questions I've had over the years, and it is through Norman Lewis's work I was able to walk through in the answering of some of those questions. Here's what I learned. It takes an amazing creative ability to craft artistic narrative. That doesn't speak to you right away, but it's the way that color is used, line is used, space is used, rhythm, how pattern is represented. All of that comes together in a way to communicate in a different way. And so for me, art is always about language and communication. And so in order for me to really connect with an artist like Norman Lewis, I have to learn his language. And what I found in the first two pieces that I saw was that the language he was speaking in these abstract paintings resonated with me very quickly because of my own experience in life. And the more I sit with his work, the more connected and seen I feel. And here's the reason why. His piece, for instance, the one entitled Evening Rendezvous, and there's another one entitled Alabama. It is an act of resistance. It is brave because he's introducing this conversation in a way that is disrupting, but in such a clever way that some people don't even get it. Some people don't get it. When I first saw Rendezvous, I knew exactly what I was looking at. I knew exactly what it was. I have had the pleasure of teaching for a number of years, and I love to discuss, Norman Lewis's work with students and with other educators and, other, folks from academia. And so when I introduce this piece, I'm hoping always to introduce the ability to appreciate this type of work, but keep in mind that what the meaning of the work relates to, this is Norman Lewis introducing this conversation in the 60s. And what he's talking about, is racism and the brutality of it through the legacy of lynching in America. And so one painting, for instance, Alabama, has this dark black background, but there's these flickers of white that I knew the intensity to be heat and fire. And I know also what the history in particular navigates does not have to be communicated in the figurative, right? But you're able to embrace the subject matter without knowing the title specifically. For instance, Evening Rendezvous uses the colors of the American flag, and then, his play on light. And again, this is all in the abstract realm, but he's insinuating, this topic of the Ku Klux Klan. And so some people could very well walk away from it, and just simply say, oh, this is subjective, you like it or you don't. But if you come to a work by Norman Lewis with that mentality, you're missing so much, right? So often people think there's this randomness about the work. This is not colors thrown together, color fury, right? This is color theory. And to understand color theory and how color works, it is a skill. It is a learned skill. And to build a composition around that, the various types of lines, line quality, and to communicate that on canvas or another type of, medium, whatever we're talking about, we're looking into this, the creative space, is a skill not everyone can do, but Norman Lewis could. When I look at the rest of his work, I see him, and I've seen him for many years, and I'm touched by his expertise in the impact that he has had on American art, and I would even say the global art world. Betty Saar is another artist who has captivated my heart. I have seen her work in museums in Los Angeles and New York and Washington, D.C. But the one piece entitled Liberation of Aunt Jemima, that one, funny because, there's some polarizing opinions about that particular piece, which was done, I think, in 1972. And the reason why it's a polarizing topic is because she uses three aspects of the mammy figure. So one is the mammy figure associated with Aunt Jemima pancake, right? And so there have been several variations of that Aunt Jemima, right? We've seen Aunt Jemima with her hair covered. We've seen Aunt Jemima with the hair covering removed. We've seen Aunt Jemima with a perm. We've seen all these variations of Aunt Jemima. Okay, so in this particular assemblage, an assemblage is a type of sculptural work that is usually hung, okay? And assemblage is sort of a three-dimensional collage where there are various pieces that come together that may have had a different meaning in another life, but she brings these various components together to create new meaning. And so one, the background of this assemblage, you see the Aunt Jemima from the product of the pancake box. And then there is this figurine that is a caricature, which this unrealistic pigmented skin, the wide bug eyes, and this caricature is very racialized in history. And so we see that figure. Then, center and lower in the composition, you'll see the mammy figure from the plantation, who is recognized as the figure, enslaved figure perhaps, that raised white babies. And so she has one baby on her hip and she has this wide smile as if she's just happy to do it. It's also unrealistic. And then within her skirting, which most people miss it, but there's this power fist, right? Also in this composition, you see the liberation flag. There's a bed of cotton. But what makes Aunt Jemima liberated? What signifies that is there's a shotgun or a rifle on one side, and then she has a handgun on the other. So it disrupts this narrative. So here's why I appreciate Betty Saar so much, right? Because, number one, she's showing me a different way to look at how to use materials. Norman Lewis did the same thing, right? It's opening this door for me to look at the creative process and owning it in my own way, okay? And so another thing is not shying away from complicated subject matter and understanding that it may not always be received, but as the artist and the voice of the work, you are committed to yourself first, honoring yourself first. And ultimately, your work will have an impact. And so it gives me permission to do whatever the hell I want to do as a creative, to communicate the way I need to. My goal is to produce work that's meaningful for me and communicates my voice. I am not interested in duplicating what someone else did or recreating, processes that were done by European artists. I have no need or desire for that. I'm not interested in repurposing, or appropriating the aesthetics. And that's a conversation for a different podcast episode. But this is what works for me. And so these artists gave me permission to be who I am. That's what I want to offer with this podcast. Permission, perspective, and possibility. Typically, when I talk about these artists, any artist within the art world, I'm professional in the sense that I choose not to lead with bias. My goal is to teach it in a comprehensive way, to talk about art in a comprehensive way, removed of bias. Because I only want to focus on the quality of the messaging and the technique and the narrative and the experience of the artist, with the exception of Picasso. Okay, we're gonna have to listen. I will actually make sure to do an episode on Picasso, not a whole episode about Picasso, because this podcast will not be centering artists like Picasso. But I think it's important to understand why artists like Picasso are problematic, and learning that will hopefully inspire others to sort of rethink and reconfigure how they've been seeing and appreciating art. And maybe my voice will offer a different lens in that regard. So I hope that, whether you are in academics or not, right? Because this is a safe space for everyone. The purpose of this space, I hope that you will join me. And if there are artists, or if there is a different art movement or content or area within art that you would like to contribute as far as, ideas, maybe a specific panel discussion or specific people you would like me to engage with, just let me know. And you can drop a message on the YouTube channel in the comments, or find me at Global ArtSpeak on Instagram. So I hope you enjoyed this first episode, and I hope it will be the first episode of many. And so I have a lot of plans, and this setting, by the way, don't get used to it. I'm on location in Costa Rica, but the future episodes, when I am back stateside, it will look a little bit different and it will feel a little bit different, but you all are welcome, and let's do this. Peace.